My third year at Farm and Wilderness. I'm a Plymouth resident on the Plymouth School Board. I love Plymouth and I'm really excited to be here. I'm more excited though that you all are here because it's hard to get to know your neighbors in the long winter months. People sort of all bundled up and we're just scurrying from place to place. So hopefully some of you, now that I know your neighbors, when you see me running on 100, you'll wave or just swerve around me, so, unlike some cars. I also want to take a moment to introduce our staff who are here. We've just finished our board weekend, and the timing was perfect. When Betsy approached us and said, hey, the Plymouth Historical Society would like to do something, it resonated because we wanted to try and find a way to reach out to the community. And we thought pancake breakfast, what are some other things we can do? So the timing was perfect, and we're really thrilled that you're here. So I just want to take a moment of our year-round staff and former year-round staff to introduce, starting with Peter Bowen, who's our president, and you've known a former executive director, Farm and Wilderness, for over 10 years. We have Leah Pillsbury, who's our capital campaign director. Who else is here? Jen Flaster, who is our development director.
And Plymouth resident.
There you go, and Plymouth resident.
Joy.
Sam Arfer, who is our admission director and Ludlow resident, so he's a neighbor. Then we have Joy Alper, who is our, what do you want to call it?
Front office, everything.
Yes, she's the everything person, a neighbor in Killington. And we have Linda Berryhill, who was a former admission director. And let's see, who else is here? Oh, yes, Jay Coleman, a Plymouth resident who you've probably seen at meetings, and our resource director. And I think that's it for, oh, and now for trustees and our former executive director, Jack Hunter. We're really fortunate to have him here. And then we have two or three trustees. We have Janet Green, who's our clerk of the board. We have Amy Hunter and and our keynote speaker, Kristi Webb, whose family you will hear about. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Betsy Tonkin, who's going to kick us off with the Plymouth Historical Society. Betsy.
I'm not like Rebecca. I can't do it without notes. So I'm and glasses, that's right. It's the age where you have to have glasses. Well, anyway, this is really very, very exciting, and we are just thrilled to be a part of the Farm and Wilderness event. And so, thank you, Rebecca, for getting things started, and welcome to all of you here. It's so good to see a number of you. As Rebecca said, I'm Betsy Tonkin. I'm from the Plymouth, Vermont Historical Society. And the Historical Society is really very, very grateful to Farm and Wilderness for hosting this joint event. And not only will we hopefully learn a little bit more about the camp and the camp experience, with a little history thrown in, and we've seen now how the camp puts together, prepares and presents a camp lunch with circle time and so forth. And we hope maybe a mini tour of the campus. I've come prepared with my
Betsy, you
boots.
look like you're prepared for barn chores.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right, exactly right. So anyway, we have the makings of a really great get-together. So it should be noted, as it has already, that we are piggybacking on is it a quarterly meeting? Quarterly meeting of the Farm and Wilderness Board. And so we are doubly grateful that you've allowed us to be guests in your midst. So actually, the idea to pursue this connection with Farm and Wilderness came from one of the members of our Historical Society, and it was really a timely suggestion because last summer we were engaged in doing interviews for a documentary film called Irene, Ruin to Renewal, about the catastrophe of Tropical Storm Irene that reconnected our town of Plymouth. and this will be shown for the first time August 27th, this coming summer, which is actually the 5th anniversary of the storm. I had to get the plug in for the film. So one of the interviews that we had was with Jay Coleman, who's sitting right over there, who is the resource director here at Farm and Wilderness, as you know. And he recounted the story of how Farm and Wilderness came together and contributed to the process of recovery after Irene. And it was actually through the actions and volunteer efforts of the Farm and Wilderness staff that the people of Plymouth got to know a little bit more about who and what Farm and Wilderness is. And as Jay said in his interview, and I'm quoting, taking a little liberty, for our relationship with the town, the hurricane was the best thing that could have happened. Because we got to know the folks in town and they got to know us. And he finished off by saying, I hope there are more spaces and opportunities for us to interact. Here and now is one of those opportunities. And as we were talking to people in and around Plymouth about this event, some of the responses that we got were things like, is that the camp over by Woodard Reservoir? Or, gee, I've always wanted to know more about Farm and Wilderness. And even, is that the nude? So, we do have a lot to learn. So being good neighbors depends on knowing more about each other as well as on trust and respect. And with that as a foundation, Farm and Wilderness and the town of Plymouth hopefully will continue to build on and expand our connections. So I think our purpose today is to get better acquainted. And we will do that in part through the eyes of Kristi Webb, by learning more about the camp. And we might call Kristi a lifer.
Oh, yeah.
A lifer. Because Kristi is the oldest granddaughter of the founders of Farm and Wilderness, Ken and Susan Webb. She hails from Chapel Hill, North Carolina. She's a practicing psychologist. But she herself came through the ranks of Farm and Wilderness, starting off a youngster in, I think, what we now call the Barn Day Camp, and has continued up to today as a 15-year board member.
Somebody talked to you, didn't they?
I got some inside information. Yeah, I did. And this is more of the inside information. She also met a camper here in 1965.
Yes.
And they subsequently got married in 2000. So she goes back a long way. So Kristi hopefully will be shedding some historical insights on how the camp evolved over the years, what the camp experience is like, and how the town of Plymouth and the camp have interacted. And following Kristi's presentation, I think we'll have some time for some questions and answers. So I can't think of anybody more qualified to tell the story of Farm and Wilderness than Kristi Webb. You got it, Kristi.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming and Betsy for asking me to do this. I'm also, we were saying earlier, I'm disappointed that today's weather isn't yesterday's because I want you to see this is the most beautiful spot on the face of the earth. When we sing in Simple Gifts, the Valley of Love and Delight, this is the Valley of Love and Delight. I also won't do this without notes. Mine are a little more high-tech than yours. But I'm going to try carrying them. I tend to do a lot of arm waving as I talk, so I may have to resort to putting them down somewhere. So I want to start by saying that this was never intended to be a camp. My grandparents, Ken and Susan Webb, were educators. They were both classicists and had been teaching. They'd been in Baltimore. By the end of the 1930s, they were in Buffalo at the Park School. Grandpa was teaching in a series of prep schools. He had taught at the Putney School. Grandpa Grandpa Ken was, he was a visionary, and if you have ever had interaction with a visionary, you know that they can be interpersonally challenging, as we psychologists say. And so there was some big blow up at the Putney School with the head of school, and he went off in a huff, so ended up in Buffalo. And what he really wanted was to found a school. So that was his and Grandma's intention, but the country was still coming out of the Great Depression. Grandma and Grandpa were very taken with the ideas of John Dewey, and if there are any graduates of Antioch College or anybody who knows anything about Antioch College, his ideas really influenced that college in the Midwest. His whole focus was experiential education. And so the other thread that tied in with this was that in the 1920s, Grandpa had taught at the American University of Beirut in Beirut, Lebanon, a very different place than it is these days. And one summertime, the Near East Relief Organization asked him if he would organize and direct a summer camp for Armenian boys who had been displaced by the Turkish massacre of 1922. And he was tremendously impressed by how these little boys were able to do so much with so little. They, they didn't have shoes. Most of them had one set of clothes that they had escaped the massacres in. And he was just tremendously impressed by how creative they were with the very few resources that they had. The name of that camp was Camp Snowbar. Note that, that's going to come back. Camp Snowbar. Snowbar is the word for pines in the Lebanese language. So that was Grandpa's experience with summer camping. Grandma Susan was from a fairly well-known family in Vermont. She was from Burlington. She and her identical twin sister. They were daughters of a judge, Harry Stinson Howard. She was a Howard. I have to quickly say, not the Howard Bank, Howard. And Grandpa, the Webb, was not the Shelburne Farms Webb. If it were the Shelburne Farms Webb and the Howard Bank Howard, believe me, we wouldn't have a capital campaign director. Fine. But prominent Vermont family, and Grandma had grown up going to Eagle Camp in South Hero, which is, I'm not so familiar with the northern part of the state, but an island in Lake Champlain. And she'd had a wonderful time as a camper. She and her twin sister had enjoyed camping very much. Now, another thread that I want to weave in here is that they were both what's called friends by convincement. Friends, another word for Quakers. They had not been brought up, either of them, in the Quaker tradition or in the Quaker faith, but when they were in Baltimore, just prior to going to Buffalo, had become friends by convincement. Their values and the testimonies that Quakers adhere to or believe in, live their lives by, were the same. Social justice, simplicity, equality for all, community, and of course the one that the Quakers are probably best known for is the peace testimony. So they had become friends by convincement. Grandma had a little experience of summer camping. Grandpa had organized and directed Camp Snowbar in Lebanon. They had $200 on loan from a friend. So this now started with a $200. It wasn't even that they had, believe me, they didn't have $200, but they had borrowed $200. And they decided that they could try a camp, that maybe that would, hold Grandpa for a while until he could eventually start the school. And they came out in the summer of 1938, they came out here to look at two pieces of property. The one that they had described to them that they thought they were going to end up leasing was up at Lake Nineveh in Mount Holly. But they were also planning to look at this property here up at the north end of the lake. There was a hurricane. And they couldn't get to Nineveh. And so one week, so they had driven over from Buffalo. This valley had completely escaped the ravages of the hurricane. It had been untouched. So they came and they looked at 100 acres here at what we now know as Camp Timberlake and the Barn Day Camp. And they were very taken with it. How could they not be? The most beautiful spot on earth. Now, it is true that subsequently, about a month later, Grandpa came back and Moses Townsend showed him around what is now our Nineveh property. But Grandma describes clambering over fallen down logs and pushing aside brush that was still present, and they decided that altogether, in the face of the kind of preparation of the land that they would have to do up at Nineveh, that they would lease 100 acres. Now, at that time in this valley, there were the remnants of 3 farms. And they were the Crandall farm, which was at the south end, the Morgan property. The farmhouse had gone, but on this site right where we are, there remained the sugar house. That'll come back into our story later. And just to the north of us here, if you go out this way, or if you came in this way, you'll see a beautiful field up to your right, and that was the mowing of the Bishop farm. So we had Crandall, Morgan, and Bishop here. There were 4 cottages on the property at that time, and they were all at the south end. There was the Cram Cottage, which is still up high, up above the house that is the southernmost promontory on the lake. It's either Atwater or Atwood, is where, for those of us who are farm and wilderness people, I always get these 2 mixed up, is where Birches is at Camp Indian Brook. And the Putnam Cottage was where Beaver Lodge now is. And finally, there was, sticking out where the house that we now call Snow Bar is located, the Baker family had a cottage. And these were, in the Vermont tradition, these were their summer camps. Summer camp. As a child, this confused me mightily. I could not understand why they were called summer camps, because to me, summer camps were where children came and gardened and hiked and swam in the lake. But excellent Vermont term. So these were their summer camps. So this lake is not a natural phenomenon. Woodward Reservoir was created in 1869. Because of the landscape here, we have a number of brooks that feed into it, and the water flows south into the Black River that powered the mills in Ludlow, and north into the Ottauquechee, and there were 4 woolen mills along the Ottauquechee River. And so those 4 woolen mills in 1869 got together and created Woodward Reservoir. They were the Plymouth Aqueduct Company, they were called. This was early hydroelectric power. And so we'll come back to that, because as we began to buy pieces of property to create the holding that is now Farm and Wilderness, obviously something had to be done about that. Also, the woolen mills have now left us. But, okay, so 1869, 4 woolen mills, the dam is there, and it's the Plymouth Aqueduct Company that was managing the rise and fall of the level of the lake to power the woolen mills. So we get to 1939, and the first camp opens. It was called Camp Meerlicht. It's a German word. It's actually 2 German words. Meerlicht, which means more light. You will now learn something essential about my family when I tell you that these were Goethe's last words. Okay, I mean, really, who does that, right? So it gives you a sense of what it was like growing up in my family, right? Dinner table conversations, you had to have your references, preferably in the original Greek. That would be best, right? So Camp Meerlicht. They had 28 boys. The opening day was July 5th of 1939. The tuition was $250. And from the very beginning, we had camperships. because not everybody could afford that, and my grandparents were absolutely committed to children who wouldn't otherwise be able to have this outdoor educational experience being able to have it. My father is the middle